Hiya, I am Cosmic Sass. I am the creator of a webcomic, PMD Ancient Revival, and I'm making this video as a 4-year anniversary for my comic, as on the 30th of May, it'll be 4 years of me uploading comic pages. This is actually the second time I am recording this video, as the first time the audio came out very poor, and I'm hoping that this time it'll be at least a little bit better. And in this video, I hope to go over previous comic pages and give some thoughts as to what I was thinking at the time, and perhaps some insight as to the actions of the characters, and a little bit about some of the comments I received on some pages as well. So, to start off, we have the cover. This is actually the redone cover, as I did a previous version, which I really didn't like. So, in this one, it is more eye-catching overall. You might have questions about who these characters are, why this comet is significant, what this little thingy is, and all that sort of stuff. So I really do like this comic a lot more than the previous one I did. Sorry, this cover. There are some changes I would make, a little bit with like the shading, some line art changes I do, but for what it is, I am quite happy with how it turned out. And this is the previous cover. I did it quite early on, and you can tell in the way I drew the characters. I improved a lot over time and sort of got a better understanding of how the characters' anatomy works. I think it's a lot less eye-catching than the previous redone cover is. So, sometimes we would do stuff and we figure out a better way to do it over time with experience. So, we start the comic in Baisley Biotech Learning Labs. And this is actually a bit of important, as this does come back later. And it is a major sort of faction in the world that Ancient Revival takes place in. And of course we see our main character Micah with his father figure Jonathan, who runs the learning labs, as you might deduce by the diamond symbol also being on his head. And another thing to talk about is the title scheme. So originally, I titled it like Intermission, Dungeon, Event, and then it would cycle over and over again. But over time, I realized that the naming scheme might be confusing to some people, so I decided to just change it to chapter, number, and then title. Good lord. So, that's a bit about the titling information. So we start out with Micah being very unsure about the mission, and to help sort of calm himself, he reads a letter from his grandma, who's referred to as Nan, and we get some information about what the comic is even about to begin with, which is Micah finding a cure for his ailment. And we learn that a little bit more about this, in that it's a feral-born disease. Essentially, when Micah is put under too much pressure, too much stress, he will go into a bit of a feral state and, flight or fight his way to what feels like safety to him. And if I could change anything, I probably would have put more of that information in the first chapter, so that we're not just like, oh, he has a ailment. We would know exactly what it is, instead of sort of the more drip-feedy way that it ended up doing it. So we see more of Micah. He's obviously a very anxious person, and then we see our second main character, Alessandro. He's looking a bit wide in this page. We can forgive him. But we see he is a lot different from Micah, as he's very confident in himself, and he is there to sort of balance out that anxiety from Micah and to keep him safe from the wild Pokemon or other dangers they might encounter in the wild. And even from the beginning, Alessandro is there to comfort Micah in all sorts of ways. And I'm also seeing, just like as a side comment, some things I would change artistically, like, for example, his cheek fur, Micah's cheek fur, goes from being up and sort of rounded, and then it goes down and being pointed, and then it goes up and being pointed. And while this isn't a big, giant, massive issue, it is a bit of an inconsistency that I later went on to be more consistent about in later chapters. And then also over here in this panel, Alessandro's ears go like right up to the border, and I would have changed that as well if I were doing these pages today. So that is actually the end of our first chapter. You know, for a first chapter, I'm not mad at it. I think I probably, if I went back, I would change quite a few things about these early chapters. But I may have actually combined this with the next chapter so that instead of it being two distinct chapters, it's just like, oh, here's a flashback, and then we go to the current time of day. And that's probably what I would have done differently if I could restructure the comic overall. But on to the next chapter, which is 8th Dungeon. And I remember doing this background. I remember being very happy with it. And I think for my skill at the time, it did come out quite well. And it actually is very different from how I do backgrounds now, because I started out doing line art for the backgrounds, but now I do it in a lineless style. And I think that greatly improved how I do backgrounds. But you know, you learn with time, and I think you have to try all kinds of different things to really understand what you want and what you like in your comic if you are deciding to go into making a comic. So I remember when I first did this chapter, when I first started uploading it, someone commented on the page, and they said he's an Umbreon now, I guess. And I guess it kind of confused me a little bit, because I'm like, yeah, he evolved. It is to denote the change of time, and I guess maybe that's not obvious to all people, but him evolving between the first chapter and this chapter is to denote that they've been on the road for a while, and not only does his evolution denote that, but rather a more slightly confident Micah is also meant to sort of show that. And we see Alessandro accuse him basically of reading his grandma's letter again, and this was meant to tie into him sending letters to his grandma, as they are very close, but that ended up not getting included as much as I hoped it would. But either way, we see Micah looking at a map, and they decide to go into this little tunnel. And they do have a bit of a bantering relationship here. I probably would have changed it, as Micah is a bit mean. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's more bantery than I probably would have displayed it with my better understanding of the characters that I have now 4 years later. So we also see here that Micah is rather infatuated with Alessandro, but he does get a bit frustrated with him at times. So they go into the cave, and we see a little bit more of their bantering. We see that Micah really likes to hang out with Alessandro, and we see that this is really something that makes Alessandro happy, though his expression is a bit mischievous, we might say. And of course, Micah is still rather nervous despite his somewhat boost in confidence. So we see them exploring the cave. They're chit-chatting, they're encountering the flora and the fauna. I perhaps wouldn't have portrayed this as it is now. Well, I can understand that these are basically just different conversations that they're having over time. I maybe would have just had them looking at different parts of the cave, and commenting on what they're seeing rather than commenting about like books they liked to read. But eventually they take a little break. Oh my goodness, I would have done this background very differently if it were today, but you fail at something to learn from it. But they're taking a lunch break, and Micah is expressing his nervousness about the mission, as it really feels like he hasn't made much progress despite all the exploring they've done. And Alessandro is combating this with experiences that they previously had, where it's sometimes not obvious what the answer is until they look a little bit deeper. And eventually they do find something that does seem to be the answer, which are these herbs. However, they are soon greeted by a new person, and she explains that these aren't the cure that Micah had hoped they would be. So he picks up some of them, stores them in his water can, and he gets the very bad news that there, in fact, is not a cure to the feral sickness. It's a genetic disorder, and there really isn't much you can do about it. However, there is someone she knows in a nearby area who knows how to, suppress the symptoms. And so even if there isn't an outright cure for it, there still is some hope for what can be done. And she goes away, and while Micah is, reasonably upset that the mission he's been on for over a year now is basically a failure and that he can't, quote, fix himself as he had hoped, he's still determined to, learn more, figure out what he can do next. So they set out, they get some more of the herbs into his water canteen, and then they start setting out to their next destination, which leads into the next chapter. This is an event chapter, as the previous one was a dungeon, and we see that they've set up and that it is morning time. But Micah is not doing very well. We're about to see the consequences of that, basically. So Micah gets up. You can pretty clearly tell from his appearance that he is not doing well as the strange actions he takes. And we get a glimpse as to what he is perceiving of the world around him and the thoughts that he is having in his inner head about these paranoid thoughts that he's having. So he's pretty much deteriorating right on the comic page, and here we see how I would draw differently later on, because I took a long time to kind of figure out how I wanted to draw Alessandro really. So in this panel you can see his arm is it's much more human than animal. It took me a while to sort of figure out how I wanted to draw that. You can see here's leg. I ended up doing more of a straight, streamlined kind of design for his leg, but here it's very segmented, more like a cartoony dog than I would have it. And then here you can see his neck. Normally I'd have it sort of attached up here, but it's very low on his body, because early on I wasn't as experienced with drawing them. I could draw them very quickly because I had drawn them a lot, but I didn't quite understand their anatomy as much as I do now. And that is something I would go on to improve greatly with over time. But we see Micah finally snap, and he's really freaking out. Alessandro's trying to calm him down with his words, but Micah runs away because he's having his flight moment from his feral disease, and Alessandro is not very happy about it. He goes out, he chases after Micah, he shows some excellent tracking skills with smell and seeing clues within the environment, and then he finds Micah all up in a tree. And we get a bit of a glimpse as to Alessandro's somewhat aggressive personality at times, where he somewhat threatens Micah here. He's trying to talk him down basically, but instead of being very soft and gentle with him, he tells him, there's no point in running. I'm going to capture you, so just make it easy for both of us. But we see that Micah isn't really seeing or hearing any of this. He's just sort of perceiving a freaky monster in front of him due to his feral episode he's having. And because of that, he basically sends an attack out to Alessandro as he runs away. And then we get introduced to another part of Alessandro, which is that he tends to imagine in his mind the taunting words that his siblings would have towards him, as he is rather self-conscious, maybe. He beats himself up really badly over his failures, and that is personified in his mind by the awful words that his siblings might say to him. I did have people early on speculate that these were ghosts or that they were like schizophrenic hallucinations, but no, it really is just the personification of Alessandro's inner thoughts. And they're portrayed as his siblings, the first two being his siblings who are rather mean to him, and then next his more kind and positive sibling, who encourages him to, keep going, don't let this failure stop you, even if you did mess it up really badly, you can fix it. So he packs up the tent and all their camping gear, and then he goes out after Micah, and he's sort of talking to himself as he's reasoning what he can do. But we find that Micah didn't stay in one place, and he has to find him again. He's looking around some more, and then he finds Micah. However, he's been caught in a trap. Instantly, Alessandro jumps in to save the day. However, he finds that the rope it has a metal core in it, so it's not so easy to just bite through as he hoped. And he kind of gives up a little bit. But we see Alessandro has a bit of knowledge when it comes to traps. He finds this quick release that is on the trap, and then he is able to free Micah without having to break through the rope. He drags him to land. He gives him chest compressions. He's freaking out, but he manages to save Micah, and he is kind of a bit, as you can imagine, a bit disarmed by the events of almost losing the person he's meant to protect. Next, we see Micah's dream. We see this comet, which is kind of like the one we see in the cover. We see he's a lot younger, and he's spending time with his father figure, Jonathan. He goes to get the telescope, however, he breaks it. Oh no, he's gonna be so fired for this. But he comes back, and things are a lot different than they were. Basically, everything's changed, and Micah's whole family just arrives. He gets into a bit of a fight with one of his sisters. However, everyone's angry about him for it. It's so over for Micah. We see a strange person in the background who wasn't there before, and Micah tries to fix an issue. However, he only makes things worse, and he's hurting his family. We see that his nan is so totally dying, and he is blamed for it. And within this comic, within this chapter, I tried to give a lot about what Micah feels internally, which we learn later in the comic, which is guilt over killing a family member, fear about his family hating him, fear about making Jonathan unhappy with him, and trying to fix things but only making them worse. So those were a lot of Micah's insecurities sort of crammed into this one few page long dream he had. But he wakes up, and he finds he's in somewhere completely different. And he sees Alessandro. He gets an explanation on what happened, and we learn that Alessandro basically hauled all of their camping gear and Micah to the edge of the coast that will take them to the tide pool zone. And I remember at the time I was so happy with this background. Honestly, if I ever do go back and redo a page, it might be this page or just this panel, because while I was happy with this at the time, I feel like now I can do a lot more with it. But with the skill you have, you can only do so much, and I'm very happy that I was able to make something that I was so pleased with at the time. So Micah apologizes, but Alessandro is like, chill, I could have done better at comforting you after you learned such awful news. Let's just rest so we can get going tomorrow. And this is the first, I feel like this is the first page of them being sort of oddly really close to each other. I remember getting a comment on the page way later where someone says they act way more like mates than friends or something like that, and I had a little laugh because I'm like, it's always been that way. And that's a bit of a insight as to how sort of strange and unconventional the relationship between them is, even if it's not just a straight up, modern day love relationship. it's complicated between them. And so Micah tells Alessandro about the dream, and we get a bit of a tease as to what it made him think about. But Alessandro just tells him, calm down, it's chill. It was just a dream, and dwelling on it is not going to help you. And that seems to help Micah as he goes and takes a rest in preparation for the travel the following day. We next start off with another intermission chapter. This one, we get to see a look at Alessandro's family. We've seen the brain manifestation versions of these three characters, but now we're introduced to his mother and his father as well. We also see that he comes from a big family of EVs, and that they are seemingly very proud of their family. We see that one of his family members has just finished a mission for his father, but he's very displeased about it. We also get a little bit of a Tiny Sam cameo on this page, but he gets chewed out by his father, and he's obviously very affected by this. But his mother comes in and tells Dad to chill out. And he takes a breath, and then he gets into what these other two siblings were working on. And of course they didn't feel like their brother did, as you can probably expect from what we've seen from their personalities thus far. When his brother asks what he will be doing next, he basically just gets the worst possible answer of just being sent away to some summer villa to be sure that is ready for his uncle when he goes on a summer break, which is obviously very, very much a punishment in this family. So then we see his brother talk about Alessandro in a very condescending manner, especially with how his expressions are. We learned that this sort of arrangement between Micah and Alessandro wasn't quite just a Micah needs a bodyguard situation, but rather a little bit orchestrated, as Alessandro's father explains that this mission could bring his family and Micah's family closer, and also increase the relationship between them and Jonathan, and that it's also revealed that Jonathan didn't actually really believe Micah could do it at all, and he believed that he would give up rather quickly. But we get from this that the family are very much using Micah, and thus Alessandro, his tenderness and his friendship with Micah is very much built upon trying to use him for his family connections rather than any fondness for Micah himself. Though if anything developed from that, we will possibly see later in the comic. He gets encouragement from his mother and his eldest brother, and then we see him modern day, in that he basically feels like he very easily got Micah wrapped all around his finger, and that it was really no trouble for him at all. And then we start on the next dungeon chapter, and they're headed out to the tide pool zone. We see once again that Micah is very much infatuated with Alessandro, and we learn a little bit about there being some gang activity in this area. We get this big, beautiful spread page. I was so excited to share this with everyone when I first made it, as I spent a lot of time thinking about the tide pool zone and how perhaps some fish Pokemon might move between the tide pools, or how perhaps there might be a delivery service, or what the area would look like in general. So I was very happy to finally be able to share it with everyone. We see them come up to a restaurant and take a seat, and as a bit of a background detail, we learn later that one of the gangs is named the Red Bellies, and this banner here is actually a symbol basically denoting that this restaurant is in affiliation with the Red Bellies, as there's a Red Belly what's it called? Not Carnivine. Carvana, there we are. a Red Belly Carvana in the restaurant. But when they sit down, this Kecleon guy tells them, hey, you really shouldn't sit there. You know, some people, they have seats that they always sit at, and you know that's one of them. But Alessandro he's not having it. They're not here, so why can't we sit here since it's empty? But then the people arrive, and they are there. Some design changes I would have made at the time is that I probably would not have made this a Kecleon, because later on I'm pretty sure it's the next chapter actually. The next chapter we meet a different Kecleon, and so I feel like even if most people can sort of tell the differences between their design and some other subtle hints around that character, it might confuse some people into thinking they might have been the same. So I probably would have changed him to something else tropical themed. But we see our first iteration of the Greencoats. These four, the fourth member is in the back. But we see these guys show up. I sort of changed how I did Sam's crest, fin, but here it's kind of curved. But it looks more droopy than anything, so I definitely changed how I drew that over time. But Sam introduces himself, he sits down with these guys, he's heard they arrived, very freaky, but he comes and he asks what they're here for, and Alex immediately steps in and kind of keeps Micah from giving too much of their information to this guy. However, he basically just volunteers himself as their guide, and we see here, I was having a bit of struggle with coloring the characters during this time while I was making the comic. It was partly because of the pen size I used, and as well, it was the technique that I used, but in some of these pages you can see a little bit of white around the outside, and then right here you can see these white pieces I didn't catch before I finished the page, and eventually I changed how I did that, but you can tell in a few of these pages for this chapter and the next, like you can see here as well, and here there are a little bit of weird coloring artifacts around the line art. So Sam volunteers himself as their guide, and then they get going, and they see the shaman, or rather they see where the shaman stays. And we see all these other Pokemon all around her little water island. Sam just jumps over the railing just because he can, and they walk down to meet her. And on the way, Mike is so excited because he's never met a shaman before, and he secretly actually always really wanted to be a shaman. However, both Jonathan and now Sanjo are just kind of really crapping all over that idea, in that, oh, shamans aren't real. They just use fake smoke and mirrors to make it look like they have these divine powers. And we also get the first iteration of the rainy background behind Micah, which will eventually build up to something that happens 2-3 chapters from now. So despite essentially just telling Micah that his dream is stupid, Alessandro tries to really reel it right back around and say, well, you know, maybe shamans can actually be magic or something. And this is sort of playing into what we learned from the previous chapter, in that he's just trying to get really close to Micah and get Micah to trust him. And so now we finally meet the shaman. She is a shiny mudkip and the sister of Sam. She is also a little bit of a silly Billy, and she loves to dress up in all this flowy fabric and elaborate outfits. And we get the first instance of her veil disappearing on the second page. I didn't have a proofreader around this time, so a lot of stuff got missed, such as her veil disappearing, not only in this panel, but I'm pretty sure from after this page, she just doesn't have it anymore. Very, very sad about that, as I really liked that part of her design, but, you know, you learn over time from your failures. But she asks what brings them to the Tidal Zone. And before Micah can even get out a sentence, Alessandro is beefing with Sam again, telling him, you don't have to stay and help us, but Sam beefs right back with him, telling him, I don't mind. And it's very clear that these two are not a big fan of each other. Another thing that is shown in this chapter, we see that even though Micah is infatuated with Alessandro, he also notices when he's doing all these sort of subtly crappy things, such as interrupting his sentences and trying to control the people around them. And, he gets annoyed with Alex. So he might be a bit naive and he really doesn't have a spine to stick up for himself, but he does notice these things and he does interpret them as being as annoying as they are. So we get these two talking to each other. We see how Morty is a very silly person, and we get a little bit of lore about how the stripes around Micah's wrists are denoting of how he is a part of the McNamara family. So he shows the plant he got, and Morty basically explains that the plant is helpful for feral sickness, but, it's kind of like the real stuff, and you might want something a little lighter for to start with. And they basically work with each other to make a deal on what they want from each other. Whereas he might give her this plant, she will teach him how to make the medicine that will be more suited for him. Of course, Alessandro is still interjecting during this time, getting on Micah's nerves. But eventually, they sit down to start working on the remedy. This was my nightmare. This rock wall. I may have simplified it a little bit if I made it this today, but it is also somewhat representative of Morty, where it's just all this random stuff. Bottles, boxes, a chest, and I really liked the idea of just having a rock with all these holes in it that could be used for storing all these different ingredients that she uses for her medicines and such. So, I completely forgot to shade the background on this panel, I guess. But Micah reaches into one of the holes and he pulls out this badge. And from this, we can learn that she was also once a part of Baisley Biotech Learning Labs, as we have the initials and the diamond symbol, and we get her full name on it. So clearly she also once worked for Jonathan, and Micah doesn't bring this up because he kind of gets the vibe he wasn't meant to see that. So he tells her that they're out of an ingredient, and she asks him to go get some more, since he's basically getting this remedy for free. And Sam offers to help because he's just that good of a guy. Alessandro tries to, butt him out of the situation, but Sam, he is as much of a, he's swinging around his own power as much as Alessandro is. And he also dodges the question on why him and his buddies are all wearing their green coats. So they talk a little bit about the area. They talk about the island basically being called the shelf, and then the water being called the reef. And I did think a lot about the lore of the Tidal Zone when I worked on it. I'm only sad that I didn't really implement it very much outside of the characters just mentioning it. If I could change anything, I would maybe include more of the gang stuff that is mentioned, as well as just seeing more of the area rather than what they do in the chapter. So they get on the boat, and they get going. And Micah asks, why is Sam helping them so much? And I loved these two panels so much when I first made them. It's so silly. But essentially, Sam explains that he is married to someone who works for Micah's grandma, and that if his wife found out he met Micah but didn't, help him and make sure he made it around safe, he'd just get totally thrashed by her. So they head out. I absolutely loved this page when I first made it, and I think it's still pretty good. I probably would have done a few things a little differently, but I think it's really nice. And we also get a little more lore about the world, which is that there was once a great cataclysm, And once again, I wish I had gone more into this part of the lore, as it comes a lot into the Ancient Revival that has not been mentioned thus far in the comic. And essentially, what the Great Cataclysm was all these gods came together, they fought each other, and they left scars on the land, as we can see here with this big chasm in the water. So they get to where they're going, and they start looking for Love Disc so that they can get the heart skills they need. There's a few pages of Micah collecting scales, Alessandro swimming around. We get this page here, which I was also very happy with. I thought it was a unique way to show the passage of time and then progressing and such. And then we get this sort of beef between Sam and Alessandro again, where Alessandro is just being very, very competitive, even though he's clearly not going to be on the same level as Sam, who is a water type, whereas he is just a little doggy guy, and he gets really competitive and dives right in, and we see Sam sort of bonding with Micah a bit, and Micah apologizing for Alessandro. But then we see there's some trouble underwater as these bubbles are coming up. And then we see blood coming up, and we learn that Alessandro was being attacked by a Sharpedo, which Sam very much took care of. They all get back in the boat as they have enough scales, and now they have dinner. However, Micah isn't really happy with the idea of eating Pokemon, as even in this world, even though the feral Pokemon themselves are essentially just how animals are to us, Micah is still really uncomfortable with it because, you know, what if he himself was just feral in the woods one day and he got confused for being a normal feral Pokemon rather than a feral-born, and then, you know, that's just it for him. And so it's a very uncomfortable idea, and then Alessandro makes it worse. He's trying to explain, oh no, you know, feral-born Pokemon don't just get eaten because there's rules and, you know, there's ways to tell, but it really doesn't comfort Micah at all. They get home, they have dinner, Alessandro is bonding with the green coats again, but Micah's feeling really sad and on his own and left out. We see Morty come over to him, and she is, you know, a bit sloshed, but Micah confesses that he feels ruled by his emotions, and not only in part by how his emotions make him go feral, in which case he does truly, completely lose control of himself, but Morty very much so, you know, enforces that it's okay to feel your emotions. It sucks to feel like you don't have control over them, but, you know, everyone has emotions, and it is a big part of life, and you just need to practice to understand them and not, you know, shove them off to the side as if they're not worth having at all. And they spend the night chilling, talking, and Alessandro is all the way over here with the other guys. And this is kind of really the start of the rift that is formed between them in the next chapter. Speaking of the next chapter, I forgot to put a title on it for some reason. I don't know how I managed that. But this chapter, which is Business Partners, does not have a title on it. But Alessandro hears Sam and his buddies talking, and he decides to go out and take a look and sort of snoop a bit. On his way out, we see a mural that is underneath Morty's little sanctuary area of Mesprit, and then we see a secret door, and then we just see a nice view of the little lake underneath there. So Alessandro joins the others for breakfast. Sam is obviously very brooding, not in a very good mood. And Alessandro tries to sort of break through that, but Sam is very much just has that big wall between them, until, of course, his little buddy shows up. He perks right up when he sees Micah. He gets some breakfast for his guy, somehow knowing his favorite breakfast food, and we get information about what has Sam in such a poor mood. he learned that one of the gangs in the area had been stealing eggs, and while they had been stealing them from feral Pokemon previously, they stole them from non-feral Pokemon, and that was an issue. So he has decided that he is going to go out and stop them. And not only that, but Alessandro offers himself, and Sam decides that Micah should go with him too. Micah isn't really into the idea, as, of course, he's really not a fighter at all. But, Alessandro explains that he might not be a fighter, but he can be helpful in other ways. As we know, he's a doctor, so that could be helpful. And so Micah is dragged into this big event. They set out on their boats, and Sam just pulls out a straight-up harpoon gun. So it's pretty obvious this isn't going to be friendly negotiations, at least on Sam's part. So they head out. They head into this sandy, not quite dungeon, but it has dungeon vibes to it, as we have all these errant hallways, and there's also traps. But they make it to where they're going, and they see all these lizard crocodile Pokemon, and this guy, who doesn't really fit in among everyone else. We learn that he is basically doing business with what seems to be the leaders of the Black Scales gang. She doesn't seem very happy to see Sam, and we learn a little bit more about Sam in that he used to be a part of the gangs, but he no longer is, as he moved on from this life. But you can take the man out of the tide pool zone, but you can't take it out of the man, and he just goes straight in and fights this lady. However, the guy she was talking to is not... He's not a fan. He's not going to be part of this, and he gets out of there right away. He disappears, and then everything starts moving very fastly as the group decides to split up. But Micah is obviously kind of freaking out. He is pulled along by Alessandro, but he's lagging behind, as Slackoff have the ability Truant, which basically means they can only use moves every other turn. And manifested here, it's just more like he can't attack as quickly as other Pokemon can. And he's being, ganged up on by these little Pokemon, but they're obviously still really getting the better of him. And so Micah is still chasing after his companions, but he's behind, and he's really obviously not feeling it, and he's getting attacked again. He's also being somewhat chastised by Alessandro, as he is, basically telling Micah to buck up, stop being so afraid of these little baby attacks, just keep going. Micah sees more of the carnage that Sam is doing, harpoon, blood, and then we see Micah getting ganged up on again. And it's pretty bad this time, as everyone's coming to get a piece of him. He's getting bit, rocks thrown at him, attacked, and then Alessandro comes in. Alessandro is able to take care of all these little Pokemon, but that's not everything he does, as right after he basically lays into Micah in that if you're not going to be helpful, then at least don't drag the rest of us down with you. And this is obviously it's very hard to hear. I think it'd be hard for anyone to hear such rude and mean words from someone you really care about and care about the opinion from. And it really shocks Micah, and it gets him to just leave. He hears someone, screaming from where he came from, but when he goes back, tempted to try and help again, this other Pokemon comes out. And something interesting about this Pokemon is that they're wearing the same vest and badge as that Clefable is, and they have the same pink text color. However, this will come into play later. So, he gets scared off by this Pokemon. They don't chase him, but Micah hides in his boat, and he's just kind of feeling sad and sorry for himself. And then we meet who was originally going to be the third party member. Amita the Tailo. She was going to be a part of the team, but as I continued fleshing out the comic, thinking about what was going to come, I really struggled to find a place for her, as she doesn't serve too much to the themes of the comic or the other characters or their plot lines or what even her plot line would be. She didn't live up to what Micah and Alex had to offer. And in the end, I decided that she just wasn't enough to be a main character in the comic, and that she ended up just being sort of a side character for this chapter to flesh out the world. So Micah meets this Talo. She's asking for help from a doctor, and they head out. They go down this path, and she's hurrying him along. Micah is a bit, on edge because he's going off in the middle of nowhere all on his own. And then he goes off into the woods, and we're seeing more of these Pokemon all around him, and they're all very worried about their deerling friend. Around this time of when I was making the comic, not when I was posting it, but when I was making the comic, I was going through a bit of a difficult time in my life because I was having to move. And not only was I having to move to a different part of the United States, but I was also having to move to a different country entirely. So it was a lot of stress on me, having to pack, sell my old things, organize all my documents so I could apply for a visa and all that stuff. And it doesn't show as much on these pages, but I feel like after the next few events, I at least can tell that there was a bit of a deterioration in some of the line art, some of the anatomy, and there's especially a few backgrounds where I'm like, ugh, that could have been done a lot better. But with what was happening at the time, I failed, but I also learned from those failures. And I think that's very important in making a comic, in that I didn't give up. I didn't spend another year trying to make these pages perfect. I accepted that maybe they aren't perfect, but if I don't get them done, then I'm not going to get anywhere. So Micah takes a look at this deerling. They're obviously very sick. There's a coloring error where he's supposed to be holding a flashlight and shining a light into their eye, but I think I must have just forgot what he was holding, and I didn't color it, nor did I color the light beam. So that was a big mistake. I also forgot to shade the background, apparently, on this page. But we go on, and we learn from this character what happened, which was the deerling drank some weed killer. And Micah is really uncertain about, what to do, where they even got this from. And then he sees these berries, and they're really nice berries. They're big, and they don't have a lot of blemishes on them. So he reasons that perhaps they came from a farm, which is what this character confesses. And so he decides that he's going to go to the farm to get the cure. So Micah heads out with the Talo, and he offers the Sandshrew something that he hasn't been offered in this chapter, which he really honestly should have been, which is assurance that you don't always have to be brave and head into scary situations to be useful. So they head out, they travel a ways. The backgrounds on this page are actually rather nicely done for the style I was doing at the time. But Micah asks the Talo to scout out ahead to be sure that no one's going to spot them when he, trespasses on the farm. And then we get a flashback within the chapter. We see Micah at his desk. We get that he's at Baisley Technologies right now, and we see Jonathan come in and talk to him. And essentially what we learn here is that once upon a time, Micah wasn't really, he wasn't really as studious as he came to be, as he wasn't really into chemistry, and he reasoned, well, why should I bother with chemistry? It's not really, what I'm going into. Why should I bother with it at all? And of course Jonathan chides him for just coming up with excuses for not doing what he doesn't want to do. But he explains to Micah, sometimes you just gotta learn stuff that doesn't seem like it would be helpful because it might be someday, and you wouldn't even imagine you'd be in that situation. And of course that's what ends up happening, because Micah really needs to know about his chemistry right now, but because he didn't care so much for it, he feels a little uncertain that he can actually solve this issue. So they head out, they go over the fence, and they go into the barn. They get some light, and Micah starts looking around, and he goes into his back room to find, hopefully, what he's looking for. And he does. If you are uncertain what this is supposed to be, this is essentially, there are fermenting berries in these bottles, and by attaching a balloon to the top, it will denote that the fermentation is happening by releasing the gas. He finds exactly what he's looking for, which is essentially alcohol. By giving the deerling alcohol, the chemicals within it will bind with the weed killer and hopefully pass the most harmful chemicals out of his system so that he can live to see another day. So, unfortunately, he gets a little bit caught in the act of stealing from this dude, but thankfully our tailor friend is clever, and she distracts the farmer by making it seem like it was just her in here, causing all this noise, and she gets the farmer to think that no one else is here, so he can just leave. If I changed anything about this page, so Micah's supposed to be in darkness right here, however, there's no shadows, and so it looks really flat. I maybe would have added a little more shadows to make it look a little more dimensional here, and also, I forgot to just put the glass of the lamp on this page, so it looks very silly. Gosh. Micah heads out, and he's sure to tell the tailor that stealing is very, very bad. They head back, and Micah explains to just give the deerling this, and it should help the deerling survive. And he heads back without payment because he just did it because it was the right thing to do. He goes back. We see the boats in the background. No one has come out of the little fortress situation, but he finds this other boat, and he asks if he could get a ride to the tidal zone. They exchange basically work for just a ride across the water, and they head out. And the backgrounds on this page were very nice. And I feel like this is really when I started thinking about doing painted backgrounds with the lineless art instead of doing lines and then a little extra painting to make the backgrounds pop. So Micah returns, and he finds Morty really stressed out. And she's startled by him coming back, but Micah says about the cargo boat, and she is just so overwhelmed. And he offers to help her because he's a nice guy, and she cries a little bit for it. But he wants to help, and he can, so he's going to. So we get a little bit of them making packages and making the medicine that's needed. And then they head out to deliver all of the stuff they made. Thankfully, we see that Morty has some extra help around her. But she also likes to talk to the people, hug, assure them, hand out the packages herself. I forgot to shade the basket, it looks like. And Micah looks very happy for her, but also a little bit sad. And it's because it's his dream job, basically, to come out and help people the way that Morty is, but he's not good at talking to people, and that really stifles his dreams. So we learn that Sam has come back, and he's worried about Micah because he just disappeared, basically. And he's a bit over worried, you might say. And he gives the same excuse, but Micah at this point seems a little uncertain about Sam. But we see Alex is back as well. He's very much avoiding Micah. And they start making dinner. And we see Micah he's just having a little sad boy moment. And Morty comes and checks on him. And they have a little talk about how Micah's feeling upset. However, she also points out that he didn't have an episode today despite feeling so upset and so stressed out. And so the medicine she gave him that they made together must be working. However, because he had such a bad day, she might be willing to give him a bit of the stronger stuff. And so she does. And they just chill out and float in this little lake. However, while chilling, Micah sees something a little bit weird. He sees a knife in some weird shape moving across the ceiling until it drops down and absolutely murders Morty. He's freaking out. This Kecleon is just being chill, and it knows his name, and it's not attacking him. Micah is absolutely startled, doesn't know what's going on. But if you noticed again, the text color, once again, is pink. But this Kecleon is being attacked, they're being absorbed by the water, and then they change shape. And it's somewhat confirmed that the Clefable, the Crocodile, and now this Kecleon have all been a Ditto character who have been going around doing some sort of secret schemes in the background. They managed to escape, and Micah, obviously very, very affected by Morty's death, but then something weird starts happening, and the mural in the background glows. And we see Morty turn into Mesprit. She's worried about Micah, but he is a little more freaked out than happy, we might say. And it is explained that Morty is Mesprit, but instead of just being the original god, basically, she's just a reincarnation of it. Micah's full of questions, and she decides to take him downstairs to show him something. She shows him the Cophagrigus that she entered to get her godhood, which now has her little mudkip face on it. And she essentially explains that she wasn't always the way she is now. She was once, like Micah, a part of Basic Technologies until she had a dream with a comet in it. And in the comet dream, she learned that something big and catastrophic was going to happen to the tide pool zone. So she left her home at Baisley Biotech Learning Labs, and she went to the tide pool zone, but then she suddenly stopped having the dreams, and she just felt a little bit lost. So she looked underneath the lake, and she found the Cophagrigus. And when she went inside, she found a whole different world, and after traveling through it, she met Mesprit. Now, Mesprit, if you wish to be a little uncharitable, you might call Mesprit a parasite, as he has latched onto Morty and is giving her his powers. However, she can only have those powers if she continues to do what he likes, which is coincidentally what Morty likes to do. Morty likes to help. Morty likes to keep the tide pool zone safe, and she is very in tune with her emotions, and that's basically everything Mesprit likes to do. So it's a win-win for both of them. So Morty came out, and she dealt with the incoming danger. She evacuated everyone to the mainland, and then she waited for the danger to come, which was a Lugia. She used her emotion powers to the best of her ability, and that seemed to calm the Lugia down, and also calm the storm that he was bringing with him. However, it did leave its mark on the tide pool zone. After that, they go back upstairs, and it's basically revealed Sam knows all about it, and they go on to help Nancy, who was injured during the events earlier. Morty explains that while she was a part of the Baisley Biotech Learning Labs, she left, and it was largely because of the Mesprit thing, but also because her priorities changed. She's also a feral born like Micah is. However, hers is just especially aggressive. She changes so easily, and she really only has 1 or 2 more episodes before she changes forever, and she never comes back to being a sentient Pokemon. And so this chance at godhood that she has, it's a savior for her. She can live life without worrying that one day she's just going to have a bad day and then that's it for her. She asks Micah to, of course, keep everything a secret, and that's the end of their interactions. And now it's later at night, and Alessandro comes back to sleep. However, Micah has other ideas as he's going to talk. He wants to talk about what happened. He wants to talk about all the things that Alessandro did that upset him. However, Alessandro's really just brushing him off with shortest answer possible. And Micah gets the impression that, Alessandro must be mad at him for some reason, which is confusing, of course, because what did Micah do? But Alessandro's just like, I'm tired, I don't want to talk about it right now, I'm sorry I upset you, but can we just go to sleep? And Micah's like, okay, I guess. So they go to sleep, and Alessandro just gives him a bit of a flippant, I'm glad you didn't die. And that was the end of that chapter. It was a very long chapter, the longest thus far, with 88 pages. And when I was working on it, it was very much during that more difficult time of my life where I was struggling to find time for the comic, and I was struggling to find motivation as well. Because, when you're having all this stress put on you, you do sometimes tend to want to do just fun stuff for a while. And I think more the issue was that when I sat down to draw, I could make myself work on the comic, but it just felt like I didn't have the groove, I didn't have the mojo. Whenever I worked on it, the lines weren't quite right, the colors were being frustrating for one reason or another, the backgrounds were just arduous, and I don't think I could have really even changed that. But I think my ability to push through it and continue making pages despite the difficulties is what helped this comic not die. Because, in fact, during this time, I had to go from doing 2 pages weekly to just 1 page because my backlog was getting so low. I think I went down to like 25 pages before I had the next chapter ready. And that is really quite low for me, as I've had probably 50 pages ready to go for most of the comics run, or even more than 50 pages. So this was a difficult chapter for me. However, it of course is very important to the comic, as it is kind of the halfway point. So we go on to the next chapter. And this is when I start doing the chapter number and title instead of the intermission, dungeon, and event format. And this chapter is, of course, an intermission where we have a flashback. We see it is before Alessandro evolved, and we see that it's when they had a pretty good relationship because Micah's very happy to help his friend as he is sick. And despite Alessandro's protestations, he's, staying up to make medicine for his friend. And Alessandro falls asleep, and Micah has seemingly put his blanket on his friend's back, and he left camp to get some supplies, which annoys Alessandro for some reason. And Micah picks up on it, and not only does he pick up on it, but he's like, why don't you want me to help you? I'm doing this because you're my friend. And Alessandro we see another part of him, which is that he has a lot of pride, which comes from his family, and that, you're strong enough to go on no matter what, so you don't need the help of others. Micah, he just disregards this. He's going to make the medicine anyway, and he does his best to, cheer up his buddy, but Alex is still he's just brushing him off. We get a little bit of backstory from both of these guys in this chapter, as we see Micah when he was very young, and we see his family again, as we did in his dream that one time, but we see him leaving his family, and he's hugging his nan, but his siblings, some of them are indifferent to him leaving, some of them are happy he's leaving. Of course his mother is upset, but it seems that he definitely did not have a very easy relationship with his family. But we see Jonathan taking him away. And we get them talking more, and we also learn that Micah killed his dad. It was on accident, but you know, this is something that was hinted at early on. Once again in his dream, we hear him being accused of killing someone, and him being reminded of that event. But of course, at the time, Alessandro said, you know, that's not your fault. And here we learn more about it, which was that when Micah was young, there was a blizzard coming in, but at that time he had a feral episode and ran away. And his father didn't want to go save him, as it's depicted that, you know, if he's stupid enough to go outside in a blizzard, then he should find his own way home instead of us putting ourselves in danger. But of course his grandma's like, that's not how it works, we're saving him. And she does. She finds a little scared Micah, bundles him up, but it seems that during the search, his father didn't quite make it. Of course, Alessandro's like, you can't really blame yourself for that. But, you know, Micah is like, well, everyone else does, so whatever. And we see more of Alessandro's backstory, which is that he was treated rather poorly by his siblings, which we could very much get from his thoughts on how his siblings would chastise him for his mistakes. And even as his brother is pushing his head under the water and messing with him, his father is telling him, you know, don't yell at your brother, don't tell him you hate him, because that's your family. And without your family, you have nothing left. And it's pretty clear from there that this way of raising Alessandro really messed him up in the modern day. So we get a little bit more about Micah. He has nightmares about his sister. Alessandro, this is the confirmation basically that Alessandro is imagining his siblings there, and they're not hallucinations or ghosts or anything. And, you know, Micah sort of asks Alessandro what he'll do once they part ways, and Alex said he's just going to keep working for his family. He doesn't have any hobbies. You know, Micah sort of gives him some ideas and offers that maybe they could hang out again, but Alex is, you know, he looks rather reluctant to do so. And Micah gives him some stuff to help him sleep better, and Alex, despite everything, you can see he really appreciates it. And he beats himself up for it, because he's like, oh, someone's nice to you once, and now you're best friends with them. But he really does appreciate what Micah did for him. And we see this the next morning, because it was this event that had Alessandro evolve. And despite evolving, he doesn't seem too happy about what he has evolved into. So we go on to the next chapter. I believe this is this one's shorter than Business Partners, but this is the first chapter that I made some changes for Ancient Revival. Firstly, most obviously, I changed to do lineless backgrounds. And another thing I changed was that I went to use a text tool rather than handwriting all the dialogue, because up until now I had handwritten every letter of dialogue, and in some places you can really tell because it would be sort of slanted or really inconsistent in the size. And the reason for that is because the program I use, which is Paint Tool Sci, it doesn't have a text tool on it. So I didn't really have much of an option. But around this time I started using Clip Studio Paint sometimes, and that does have a text tool. So I made my own font and went ahead and started using that text tool to make better dialogue. And while this isn't like a concrete change, I also around this time made much more of an effort to make the characters consistent, as looking back at previous pages, I could see a lot of inconsistency within the same page of how I drew the characters. But from here on, I tried really hard to make the anatomy better, to make the shapes really consistent, and really stick to the design as to what it's supposed to look like. So we see Micah He is in a lake, and there's a burning tree, and he's running away. And then he sees this really odd creature holding him back. It's really frightening to look at, really. And he looses his scarf, but he's climbing up the tree, trying to escape, and he is just in so much peril. But in this, he also sees Jonathan within the tree. But before he can learn anything else, he wakes up. Back at the tide pool zone still. Micah heads out. We see Morty, and she makes him breakfast. She, of course, gives him a vegetarian breakfast because our man is a vegetarian king, and Sam comes over to him when he tries to sit all by himself. And he asks what he's going to do next, and Micah confesses that there isn't a point in his quest anymore. You know, there's no cure. Morty figured out everything there is about making medicine for it, so what does he have to offer? And not to mention, Alex is clearly unhappy with him. But we get a visitor. This Porygon comes down, and they deliver a message to Micah. We learn from Jonathan that he's finished his new batch of Porygon 2, and he set one aside just for Micah. Not only has he set it aside, but he's also beefed it up so it's extra strong to keep him safe. And he is more than happy to get this to Micah. However, it's a bit of an awkward package, so he sent it off with some researchers who were in the similar area to Micah. However, they're not going to be there forever, so you really got to be sure you get there before they come back home. And Micah is overjoyed by this news. He can continue on his quest, maybe, but this means that he doesn't have to drag along Alessandro with him, which is what he was feeling he's been doing. And he can, let Alessandro cut loose without him feeling bad about it. However, Sam informs him that Jonathan gave him a single day to get there. Perhaps not intentionally, but Micah only has 1 day to get from the tide pool zone to where they're going, which is Site J. It's essentially all the way up the river from the tide pool zone, and it's quite a bit of travel, but Sam pulls all of their heads together, and they learn that if they get going right now and really book it there, then maybe they can make it. And Sam even offers to guide Micah there, which he's so thankful for. So he heads over to get his stuff packed, and Morty comes in, and she's like, it's a long travel, and also there's a giant storm coming. Are you sure you can do this? And of course, Sam is like, of course I can. Who do you think you're talking to? I can do anything. But downstairs, Alessandro comes in, and they have a conversation. And Alex is like, what? You're unhappy with me? What did I do? And Micah sort of lists off these things about it seemed like Alex was upset with him, and then this morning Alex was avoiding talking to him. But, of course, Alex is saying, well, yesterday was a long day, and, we don't ever hang out with people. I like talking to people, so I'm just taking up all the time to socialize while I can. And that just seems to really shut down Micah. He no longer is explaining what's upset him, which we all know isn't these smaller things. It's the really big thing, which was Alessandro just screaming at him the day before and tearing him down. And Alessandro is really taking advantage of his avoidance of this and just saying, yeah, I'm happy to help. Don't feel bad about it. And so that conversation just didn't help them at all, really. So they finish packing up. They head out. Morty tells Sam something secret, which we don't get to hear. And then Morty gives him a bracelet, which matches hers. So they head out on the road, and they get going fast. And I just love how much the backgrounds have improved in this chapter. So they go, and Sam confesses that, maybe we won't be able to meet up with them today, but if we make good progress, then we'll definitely be able to get them tomorrow. And so, there's really nothing to worry about. So let's get going. And so we get a change in scenery as they've traveled quite a ways. And Micah sees that there's a lot of migration seeming to happen. And Sam just says, don't worry about it. And so Micah says, okay, I won't. They ditch the boats to go uphill, and they start traveling. And Micah, our poor boy, just cannot keep up. He is, despite doing his traveling thing for the past year, he is not as tough as everyone else is, and so they decide to take a little break. However, during this break, Sam and Alessandro have a bit of a beef with each other. You see, Alex is reasoning that Micah is his ward. He's here to protect Micah, so if Micah is, kind of dragging them back, then it's his responsibility to help Micah keep up with everyone. Well, Sam is like, well, this isn't even an issue to begin with because this mission is for Micah, so we should honestly be going at Micah's pace. Even if we're trying to get to this camp, if we can't get there with Micah, then we've failed the mission. And they argue, and Micah's like, I'm sorry for holding everyone back, but Sam's like, you're not. And he just says, fine, okay, Alex, if you want to take care of Micah so much, you do it, whatever. And so Alex offers to take Micah's bag so that travel is a little bit easier for him. However, Sam sees that the storm has started picking up. They head off of the dirt path to go along this rocky area, and if foot injury is sensitive for you, you might want to turn away for the next few pages, as we encounter another trap in the wild, which is the spring-loaded needle sort of trap, which goes straight into Nancy's foot. Nancy's injured, and Alessandro shows his knowledge of traps again, and while Sam is ready to just yank that thing out, Micah stops him because, she's just going to start bleeding everywhere, and we want to be sure we're ready for that. So they prepare. Micah pulls out the trap, and then they proceed to clean it, disinfect the wound, and wrap it up. However, this is another sort of issue with their travel, as Nancy can't walk on foot anymore, or her foot might get infected, or the injury might get worse. So now they have to sort of reshuffle their plans. Michael will take his bag back, and Nancy will ride on Alessandro's back, and then Wendy will take Nancy's bags. And now it's starting to rain, as if things couldn't get worse. But things just got a whole lot better, because we just met our third team member, Corefish. She sees them, and she immediately starts to follow. However, she is just a little feral Pokemon, and Sam immediately tries to shoo her away. And there's another issue with the plan, as the bridge they're meant to cross is a little bit destroyed, and that's going to make things a little difficult for them. So Sam decides to say, let's just take a break and we'll make a plan. So they set up a little tarp, and they have lunch. Micah bonds a little bit with the Corefish, and he's very interested in it, as it shows a level of intelligence with dunking its little piece of food in the water to get the dirt off of it. But Sam tells them that because the bridge is washed away, they're going to have to make a new plan, and they head up to execute the plan, but another wrench is thrown into the plan when they encounter a feral Crawdaunt upon the hill. It attacks them right away, and they have to run back for cover. And so, once again, the plan is fucked. Micah's like, oh man, well, I guess we'll just have to go back now. We can just do something else. And Sam's like, no, we made it this far. Going back is going to be longer than just pressing ahead. And also, the storm is going to get worse. So trying to go back after all of this is a waste of time. We're not doing that. And so they reason that core fish are food motivated, so perhaps that could help us with this situation. They pull together their food, and they send Alex off to distract the crawdont as they make their way across the river. Using some rope, they are able to make it halfway with Wendy to exchange with Sam in the middle, and Sam will take them the other way. First is Nancy, because of course she's injured. Next is Nathaniel. He's blind, so he's taken next. And then Micah's basically left with all the bags. When Wendy comes for him, he says, well, take the bags so that they don't get destroyed, they don't get stolen or washed away or anything. And he's left alone. And he has a little sneeze, which distracts the crawdont and brings its attention to the efforts that it might destroy. Alex acts quick, and he just starts fighting that thing. They battle, and one of the biggest things that I wish to improve on going forward is my fight scenes, as I feel like I really struggle with them. I guess I kind of struggle to imagine what would be fun and exciting and cool things that I can do within a fight scene to make it interesting for the audience. So that's something I really hope to plan on improving in the future. But Alex has this battle, and he really, really messes up his arm. But now it's Micah's turn to make it across, and Wendy's making her way over, but the rope falls apart, and she is swept down the river, and Micah he loses his grip, and he's swept away. Alex is doing his fight. Sam comes to save Micah. This page isn't shaded, apparently. We can all make mistakes at any time, it seems. Micah smashes his nose, and Alex goes in for the final hit, and this is what's meant to be the culmination of all those rainy background panels, as we see the stress of everything is starting to get to Micah. The rain, of course, is the literal rain now, and we can see he's very much similar to how he was the first time we saw him go into a feral episode. Alex does the final blow, defeating the crawdont, yet he doesn't know that Micah is having one of the worst days of his life. He's calling for help, he's still being swept away, he hits his head, Sam saves him, but it's still too late, because now Micah has gone full feral. He starts fighting Sam, as of course it's usually flight for Micah, but sometimes it's also fight, and he is fighting, and he really does a number to his friend, but he tries to shove Sam. They both sort of slip, and Sam absolutely destroys his knee on the rock, and Micah is back in the water again. He hits his head hard enough to knock him out, and thankfully he is saved by his core fish buddy. But that doesn't save him from having another weird dream. Micah sees a light, and he is determined to follow it. He follows it up and through this little crevice, and he's squeezing his way through, but on the other side he finds nothing other than himself. And when he wakes up, he's back in society, it looks like. He's a bit out of it, and of course is a little more concerned with what happened to Alessandro's arm. But Alex is like, yo, you almost died. Can you please take it easy? But Micah doesn't remember what happened. And when it's explained to him, he is just like, where are we? And, of course, they made it. They made it to Site J. They go to visit Sam, seeing a good view of the temple that is in this area along the way. And they see his leg is all bandaged up. But despite Micah, apologizing for what happened, Sam doesn't mind. They're friends. The feral sickness isn't something that Micah can control, and of course, he doesn't mind the painkillers. And what is interesting is that around this time, I actually got a comment on my comic, and it basically said that if this person had a friend that was like Micah, they would not be friends with him anymore. And while I can understand this for real life, of course, if you have a friend that is violent towards you and gets you into trouble, you wouldn't want that. However, the point of the comic is that Micah can't control this, and these people around him, they want to help him because they care about him. He's their friend. He's not his some of his parts aren't his worst moments where he is uncontrollably going through this feral episode, and it is through his friends that he learns to control this for himself. He learns to manage his stress better and manage his emotions, and it is because of the support of the people around him that he is eventually able to, improve himself. However, Micah's not really sure about why they're still at Site J. They said they were leaving, right? And Sam says that everyone's sick, so that's why they're staying. And not only is everyone sick, but it seems Sam is as well. And that's where I'm going to leave off the commentary at the end of this chapter, so that I don't get you halfway through the next chapter and leave you with a little bit of a cliffhanger there. But maybe one day I'll continue commentary and continue where we left off here. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed having all this information about my comic, some of the behind the scenes information. This is only arc 1 of Ancient Revival. I hope there to be 4 arcs, hopefully. And we are actually almost to the end of arc 1. There's only, let's see, I have 2 chapters finished, and then I'm currently working on a 3rd chapter. I have the sketch all done. I'm working on the line art at the moment, and it's a hefty chapter. Most of these chapters now are in like 70 to 90 pages. However, this last chapter is about 150, so it's quite beefy. And I hope that once I have finished with this last chapter of Ancient Revival, that I'll take a little bit of a break. However, because I have such a backlog of pages that you guys probably won't be able to really feel how long I take off from working on the comic. And the reason for taking my break is that I still want to improve my art further. You can see from this page to the first page that we looked at, the art has improved. And I couldn't have done that if I hadn't just sat down and started making comic pages one day. And while I have experimented with Ancient Revival, I think taking a break to experiment more with other things like illustrations or short comics for other things, then I feel like doing those things can help me improve and help the comic look even more good over time, as well as improve on my storytelling skills, as there really are quite a few things I would change. Namely, we're getting to the end of arc 1, and the Ancient Revival that's in the title itself hasn't been brought up. I'm very unhappy with how that's turned out. However, of course, I can't just go back and change things willy-nilly. So, if I could change one thing, I would have the Ancient Revival be more prevalent. I've thought about it a lot, actually, and while this isn't really helpful for the future of the comic, making this first arc, it does largely feel like a prologue to the story itself. You're getting a feel for the characters, their relationships to each other, the world in general, and I hope that when I get the start on arc 2, that I can much more build upon this, that I could really get us started in the way of the Ancient Revival and all of this other lore that I've set up, and really, really offer you something that's not only interesting, but perhaps even compelling. And so if you are a comic maker, or if you're just a casual artist or just a viewer, I hope you enjoyed this commentary. I hope it gave you some insight into my process or what I was thinking, or just gave you some lovely background noise while you were doing something else. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you continue to enjoy Ancient Revival. Have a nice day.